All right, we're back with another video. This one is for basic animations in 2D. And I have on the screen the basics that would you need to have for animations. And one is animation clips. These are the actual sprites that you want to be displaying as your characters or objects, explosions, anything that you want to have the animation. And these could be grouped in, let's say for character, idle, walking, jumping, shooting, taking damage, all of those things. We're going to be dealing with a thing called animation window, which is going to help us gather all of those individual sprites and organize them, set speed for these individual clips. And then we'll be talking about two more things. One is the animator, which is going to help us control which clip gets played at any given time, how we move from one clip to the other, um, something called transitions, and along with transitions, there are these things called parameters, which is sort of like variables in that they take in data and help us decide which next clip gets played. And then the last thing is some bit of code. We're going to use scripts to send messages between our characters or objects to tell the animator to receive certain information. So an animator has some parameters, and we might link those parameters with script logic to send data over there, like whether or not the character is moving around. And then we want to play the walking animation. So why don't we just get into that? We're going to close this. And let's say that we have a situation where we have the our character right here. And maybe there isn't any animation on there. Let me just show you what we're going to be dealing with today. We have our Skelly character, and it when I'm not moving anything, then it kind of plays this little idle head bop. And when we start walking, then you can see that its legs are moving around. And there it goes. And I don't have a falling or jumping animation, and maybe this video talks about that. But let's say that we're starting from the very top. We have a character and it doesn't have any animations. We're going to create a brand new character over here. We're going to call it Bob. It's just going to look just like Skelly. Okay, so for the time being, I'm just going to deactivate Skelly so we're not distracted. And we're going to make a brand new character named Bob. There's a few ways we can go about this, right? We can pull in just a reference sprite for our character Bob, or we can gather, if it's the first time that we don't have an existence of Bob in the scene, we can start out with an animation by selecting maybe a set of sprites to represent one of the animations. Now, if you want to be working with the sprites that I have a link to that sprite sheet in the description. And you can find that there, you can download it. It is a sprite sheet that's PNG. There's transparencies all around. And if you're just now importing it, let's just go through the few steps. You've pulled this into your project, and we want to cut it up. So it's not an individual sprite like this one right here. We need to deal with it and tell Unity that it has multiple sprites in there. So we select it and go to the inspector. We want to make sure that the sprite mode is multiple. From there, let's hit apply if you haven't done that already. It's sort of like a pixely type of thing, so we can change some of the filter modes to point. It's going to make it look a little more crisp. Change the compression mode to none, and that's going to make it a little bit more better. When we're dealing with pixel art, the anti-aliasing makes it actually look more blurry. So hit apply. I'm going to go to sprite editor, click on that. It should bring up this window, and maybe it looks kind of small for you. You can resize this thing, or if it looks small, you can change the shape of the slider. I made this myself, so the sizing of the individual sprites is a little bit unorthodox, but here are the numbers to help you pull out these sprites individually. Ideally, we want to be cutting this out, and there's some portions of it where the knife swing is detached, and so if you just make it turn it, if you just set it to automatic, this is what you should, this is what you might see. Let's hit slice, and if we hit this rainbow color icon, you'll notice that it gives you the outline in black and white. And so some of these things that gets detached become individual sprites, and this can be kind of messy because the editor sees as separate from the whole rest of the body and thinks, oh, this is another sprite. And in some cases, this is really handy, but in our case, it's not really that useful. So in order to cut my sprite up, if in case you're using it, we'll go to slice. Let's change this to cell size. And I believe I set this to something really weird. It's 60 by 60, I believe, with no offset or padding. And yeah, that's where it is. And one thing that we want to make sure that we change, um, especially for something that's jumping around and in this weird or unorthodox cell sizing, is that we can orient everything to the feet of our character. You'll notice that some of the times this character looks up, bobs up and down, is jumping a little bit. And if we set this pivot point to the center of each image, depending on what they're doing, it's going to look like it's getting offset from the middle. And so it might look like the feet are pushing deeper into the ground. And that's generally just a bad idea. But one thing that we can see for sure in this style of 2D game is that the feet, or this little shadowy portion of the feet, are largely going to give us the orientation of our character in relation to the ground. And so I like to set the pivot point to bottom. And if we hit slice, you'll see what I mean. Um, if I come out of this, you should see, where's the pivot point? Oh, yeah, if we select the individual cell, this little blue ring represents the pivot point. If we had just set it to center, slice, then you'll notice that each one is there. And we, of course, if we see this sprite in the scene, it's going to put the center there. So if it's moving around, this is basically the center of mass. And at any given time, it doesn't really represent our character. So this is why I like to have it bottom. Bottom center is basically what that is. And that keeps everything in proportion, and there's not going to be a weird resizing when our character moves around outside of its regular body form. Let's hit apply, and after we hit apply, you should see these individual sprites populate in our project folder, and that allows us to be able to pull in individually individual sprites if we want to, or if we want to start using animations, then we can deal with that. So let's just say that we want to create a character Bob, and I'll just pull in this first one. We can see it here. We'll just rename it to whatever name that you want for your character. And of course, the sprite renderer is there to help us see the individual sprite. We know that Bob is going to use a few things. Let's say that it's going to have a rigid body. Let's throw that on there. And let's put in a couple colliders. We're going to use 2 circle colliders, 2D. Let's throw those on there. So as soon as I hit that, then I can resize this appropriately. So it looks something like this. And I'm going to reduce the radius. Change the offset just a little bit. And we're going to have this be a regular collider. And the other one, I'm going to have another circle collider. And this is going to be our ground check. If you watch my previous video, I'll link it at the end of this, about ground checking. This one is going to be set to is trigger. And of course, it's going to have a much smaller radius. And it's going to be at the foot of my character. And just, I'm going to resize this one. We want this one, since it's not a trigger collider, to take up basically the bottom portion of my feet. And this one is trigger. So if we start the game, we'll notice that our foot is going to hit the top layer of this platform and not go through the regular collider. Great. Okay, so there's Bob. And we're going to eventually put in our movement script. I'll attach I'll link the movement script that I'm using in the description below. And I'll just slap that on there. It's basic movement. Let's see, I have one top-down basic movement platform. I'll throw the basic movement platform on there, and I'll also include the jump demo. Where's jump demo? Jump demo. Great. So if we just jump into play, then I believe we should be able to get Bob to move around. I might have to set some parameters. Oh, we're missing something. We are missing, oh, that script is already talking to an animator. So let's just go ahead and assign some animations to this thing. So we said that in the original screen that there's a few things that we need to have. We need to have animation clip. We're going to deal with an animation window, which allows us to organize the animation clips, and then the animator controls those things. So let's go and add a few animations to Bob. One way to do that is to go to Window and then go to Animation, bring up the animation window. And I usually like to have it so that I can see my character that I'm dealing with, and this is plenty of space for us to deal with our timeline. And if we've never added an animation clip to a object before, then you should see something like this. This is perfectly normal. We can hit create, and what that does is it's going to ask for the name of the clip because it's going to be physically saved somewhere on your computer. And I'll save it to my assets folder. Maybe we'll create a folder called character animations. And for this first one, we're going to call this the Bob Idle. Probably name it the character or the type of character that you're using, and then the situation that you want to use it. So we're creating an idle animation, and we should see that there's a timeline right here. We can add certain properties that already belong to our character, like we can access different components, and then we can also address the transform, scale, rotation, all those good things. But then we can also drag in these individual sprites. And so if you're using my Skelly sprite sheet, the first three ones were meant for idle, because this middle one, the head gets a little bit higher. If I shift select all of these and drag it into this space, you can see that that plus symbol appears and says, oh, you have multiple sprites. If I let go, then it's going to populate that timeline. I can adjust this multi-slider, and this can help me zoom in on the individual slides. I have three slides here, or three sprites, and we can play and test out this animation. You notice that it quickly goes through each three sprites, and this animation plays very, very fast. What we see here is in this little samples window, that represents how many samples per second that we're getting. So it's 60 samples per second. That's probably way too fast. If you don't see this little window here, you want to navigate to the top right portion of this animation window. Oh, let me turn on my cursor so you can see better where I'm pointing at. If we click here to this little gear, you're missing this samples area, go ahead and click on this frames checkbox. Why is this frames? Oh, show sample rate. I'm sorry. Click on the show sample rate. If it's missing gear, show sample rate, here it is. 60 is way too fast for this situation. Sometimes you may want it. Maybe you have something that has 60 frames that you want to show every second. Let's go like this. I'm going to change it to something like 12. I think that's a little bit more realistic. I'm using my scroll wheel to adjust this timeline now. And if I hit play, this is a little bit slower and that's better. Maybe something like 5. That's better. I can clearly see these three, and maybe I don't want my idle to constantly bob up and down like as if they're on a train or something like that. I can duplicate this last frame. I'll copy, go to the head of this timeline and hit paste. I hit Command V on a Mac. And I can drag this one out so that it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 frames per cycle. And it stays on this last frame for a second. So that way we'll see Bob move up and down, and then pause for a second, and then move up and down. And I kind of like that. That's fine. I don't necessarily want him to just keep going up and down. Maybe you do, and maybe you want to keep it the way that you had it before, but this is, for me, a nice way of idle. Cool. So we're happy with that. We have an idle animation. Let's create one more animation, and this is going to be one when we're moving back and forth. So when we're idling, it's playing like that. That's one state. And another state that we want to have is our walking state. So if we've already created an animation, we're not going to see that create clip button that was there before. One way to make a new clip is to click on the existing name, and this is actually a drop down, and you'll see that the option to create a new clip is there. Click on that guy. And then another dialog box is going to ask you to name this new clip because it's going to save it somewhere. In this case, I'm going to call it Bob Walk. New empty timeline like we had before. Now we want to be selecting our walking animation. I'm using this little slidey bar to increase the size of my sprites. We've already used the first three, and I want to find a grouping of walking sprites. Oh, I just noticed I added a blinky set of sprites into my Bob idle. Let's go back to this because I think that's kind of fun. Let's move this old one away, delete you, and pull in the fourth and fifth sprite. So we have a series of 5 sprites now. And that's going to represent our idle. Let's look at this time. There, so he bobs, and then he blinks. And maybe that's still maybe too fast. Maybe we could go something like 4 frames. Cool, okay, I'm happy with that. Let's go back to our walk animation, still empty. Let's find the set of sprites. I believe it starts at number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This here. Let's start at Skelly sheet 5, 6, 7. He's turning his hips. 8. So this is the Skelly's walking animation. The other ones, when the eyes turn red, is when it gets alerted and wants to go attack things. So we're just going to use 4. Again, we can use either this bar here, or we can scroll with our mouse if we have a mouse with a scroll wheel. And we know that 60 samples is way too fast. And so we're going to go something like 5, maybe. Scroll out. And let's test this out. Okay, we can see that it's going through the cycle and we don't have any redundant frames. So it does look like he could be moving pretty smoothly if we can see it translating one direction and the other. Cool, if we're happy with that, we don't have to hit save. It's already in there. So we'll notice that when we added these animations to Bob, our character, we had originally made this rigid body 2D and the 2 colliders, right? And we added the jump and the basic movement platform scripts. But this component was automatically added once we started dealing with animations. And so we sometimes need to add this, sometimes we don't. If we start dealing with animations, the Unity editor will automatically throw this on here. And you'll notice that the controller is named, if we don't do anything, for the same name of the character, or the same name of the object, name of the object. And we can use different controllers if we want to. Bob is one of these controllers. My existing project has another controller, and these icons look like these little nodes. And this will make a little sense in a second once we pop into our animator window. So why don't we make sure that we always select the object that we're using animations or animation clips with, and then click on the animator window. And we'll see that there's this new window that we may not have dealt with. And this sort of represents what we see over here. You see like this little triangle with lines. These rectangles here represent the 2 animation clips that we created. These 2 that are different colors are entry points into these other clips. You'll see what I mean in a moment. This one we created, this one we created. They're obviously 2 different colors. What do the colors mean? Orange means that this is the default state that your object is going to enter into. And we can change the one that's automatic. Maybe yours might say that Bob is automatically going to be in walk, and that's not what we want. If that's the case, then we can click on the one we want to change to be automatic, and we can, if it's available, we can select set as layer default state. So if the case is we want to set Bob walk as the default state, we right click or control click and select set as default state. In this case, we want to keep it like this. We want to start Bob out as idle. And if we hit play, you'll, let's separate this thing. Let's jump out of here. We know that the game window is going to automatically bring itself to the front. So let's just pull the animator window over a little bit. We don't need to see this entire game window. It's not that important right now, but we want to be able to see all of our animation options. If we hit play, we can see that this progress bar is going across, and this represents the progress through the individual animation clip that we had, as if you were going through the timeline. So we can see that it's gonna bob up and down and then blink, bob up and down and blink, right? Cool. One thing I skipped or forgot to mention is that if we need to move around, we can just click and move around. It's kind of like as if you're in some 3D editor space. We have to either third mouse button click, as if you're in Blender or something like that, or believe Alt allows us. If you hold down Alt and then drag, that's going to move us around. Okay. We can also zoom by using scrolling on our mouse or trackpad, but that's how you navigate that window. Cool. So we can see that our animation is progressing through it as if we have a timeline. Now we want to make it so that we can move between idle and walk. And so this, as a designer or developer, we just sort of need to decide what kind of logic makes sense for our changing of our states, right? And in every game, it's going to be an implementation of what you understand the character or object or thing might be doing. And you're going to define those in the states that you want. So in our case, we have two states. We have right now an idle state and we have a walk state. And we can describe those behaviors as there's no horizontal movement. When our character is not moving left or right, then we can describe that as an idle state, right? I think we can all agree on that. And if we are walking, then we can describe this as some type of horizontal movement. The way that we describe this is sometimes we're able to extract what is actually happening with our object or our character. And we can say that, oh, if our movement value for our Bob character is 0, then we can say that he should be an idle. And if he's moving left and right, then we should say that he should be in a walk state. I mean, we should play that appropriate clip, right? So if we agree upon that, then we can start to wrap that logic in the controller. So here's a controller, and what we can do is we want to be able to move between idle and walk. And right now we use this little line with a little triangle in it, and that represents transition from entering the game or the scene and immediately playing this guy. And if we want to, we need to create some transitions. In order to create some transitions, we select the clip that we want to start with and right click and select make transition. From there, we'll see that there's a little line with a triangle pointing in a certain direction attached to the end of my cursor. I can go and mouse over the clip that I want to the resulting clip that I want to get to, and then select that. And you can see that that line snaps to that clip. We want to be able to go from walk back to idle as well. So we'll do the same thing in the opposite direction. Select, mouse left click, right mouse click, make transition, and then we're going to select that one. And now we have two transitions. In order to make these transitions work, there's two things. We need to have logic inside our animator window and then we need to connect information to pass into the animator window. So we just said that the way that we were thinking about our character states is determined on these horizontal movement values, right? And so what we can do is we can create what the animator windows calls parameters. And so there's a layers tab and a parameters tab. If we select the parameters tab, we can hit this plus button with a triangle down. And we can set some parameters with a name and value. So it's key value pairs. And we said that it's based on horizontal movement. So we can go and say that we're going to be using a float value. And it's in our minds, we can call this our horizontal value. And we know that we can see that decimal point, and that's going to help us remember that it's a float value. And now that we have this parameter, we can go to our transitions and we'll select our transitions. In the inspector, it's going to pull up some information regarding that transition. It'll tell you, oh, this is a transition that exists between Bob walk back to Bob idle. Right now it has exit time checked and some other settings, and we're going to deal those in a second. But the most important thing is we want to link our transitions going between idle and walk to idle based on a condition. And these conditions are going to take into account the parameters that we provided. So right now the list is empty, and we want to say that, oh, we want to move walk back to idle when we have been walking and our character stops walking. So we can go and click this plus button, and we're going to say that when the horizontal value is less than some minuscule amount, we can call it something like that. We know that our horizontal value was something large, and then when it passes less than this small value, we can say that, oh, he was moving and no longer moving because this is a really small number. Conversely, if we start from idle to walk, we'll consider Bob not moving, and then he is moving. We want to start playing the walk animation. So in the transition, select that transition. We're going to, again, add a condition. And in this condition point, we're going to be using the horizontal value again. And we'll say that if the value is greater than 0 and we're in idle, then we want to change to our Bob walk animation. So if we start out from 0 and then we get greater than 0, we'll think that Bob is walking. I hope that makes sense. Great. So we have this logic here, but how does the animator window know what this value represents? Because nowhere else in the game is it aware of a horizontal value, right? And so the link that we use, like we outlined here, is that we're going to use our script to link or set values, parameters in the animator. And we just have to have some logic in our coding. So we jump back into Unity. We have Bob, and we have our basic movement script. And let's just dive into that basic movement script. We're going to load up Visual Studio. And let's just look through the script, which is attached below in the description. We have this value called horizontal value already. And what that does is that takes in information from when we press left or right on our arrow keys or the A and D keys. We're using the get access horizontal parameter and multiplying by a certain speed just to make our character move. And that represents our horizontal value. And what's nice about that is we can take this value and then send that over to the animator. But one thing that we said that we need to understand is if we happen to be moving left, what is a horizontal value? If we understand input get access, this number is going to be a negative value. And if we move right, pressing on the right arrow keys, input get access horizontal is going to give us a positive value. And that's kind of weird because of the logic that we have here. So the way that we work this around is if we don't press anything, we know that input get access is going to be 0. And we know that if our horizontal speed is 0, then we should be playing idle, correct? But if we move in any sort of direction, what we need to do is take our horizontal value and wrap it in an absolute value operator. Use the absolute value of horizontal speed so that so that the horizontal value parameter is only between 0 and positive number. Cool. And what we do there is we're just going to adjust this for a second, but we're using a reference to our animator. Our script needs to know that there's an animator component on our game object, this guy right here. So we have this script and we also have this animator component, but they instinctively don't know how to talk to each other, right? And there's several ways to do this, and we've done this before, but in our code, we need to first have a reference to the animator. And so if your code is missing this, we need to make sure that we add this. It's a type animator, and we're giving it a reference value variable name of animator. And the way that we get the actual instance of this animator is usually in start. We want to call the get component animator, open close parentheses, and return that reference to this variable here. Now we'll be able to use parameters from the animator, and we're able to set values in the animator. So now that we have this reference here to the animator, we can then say animator, we want to set a float because we know that that parameter was made a float. Remember when we went here and hit float, we know that there's some type of float data type in the animator, and we want to set it. So we're going to say animator set a float. We want to send it to the name of that parameter. The name of the parameter is here. That's called horizontal value. So I'm going to adjust my code to say that we want to set a parameter called horizontal value, and that value that we want to set it with is the absolute value of our own horizontal value. This is a local variable here, and this one in quotes represents the parameter in the animator. They just happen to be the same name. And then so we're calling get access and animate in, I believe, update. We're checking the axes, which is helping us see when we press the arrow keys. And based on that, we're updating horizontal value. And animate just simply sends that value to the animator. And so we need to be calling this at some sort of interval. And so we decided to put this in update after we've checked the axes. So let's go ahead and check this now. I'm going to hit play. Hopefully we don't see any errors. We might. No errors. Oh, horizontal speed does not exist. I think that is a new one. So horizontal speed does not exist. Let's go and click on that bad boy. I thought I changed it. Where's horizontal speed? Oh, thought I changed it. Let's go back. Should be talking to horizontal value. Let's clear this guy and hit play. Okay, that was an old error. So we see that this horizontal value right now is 0 because we're not moving at all. And we're appropriately playing the bob idle animation. And so if we hit our arrow keys, let's make sure that we have our speed set in our basic movement. I didn't have my speed set, and so let's just change those values. My character is natively looking right, so I'll check that box. Change the speed to 10. Excellent. So Bob is moving around. He's spinning like he shouldn't be. One way to fix that is go to rigid body 2D, go to constraints here. Where are we at? Rigid body. I don't want this thing to rotate. Wow, I didn't see. Is that right? There should be a little triangle there. Are you guys missing this triangle? If I click on constraints, there it is. We should be freezing rotation. I don't know why there was no triangle there. That's weird. So if I hit play, Bob should be moving left and right. And when he bumps into that block, it should not be falling over. So you can see also we're looking at this thing here. Bob is idling, moving through idle, and when I press left or right, we are getting to our walk animation. When I let up, it stops. If I move left, it does the same thing. But you'll notice that there's a slight delay. And where's that delay coming from? We want to be instantaneously interrupting this idle wherever we are in the animation and then immediately jumping into this other animation. It's a matter of responsiveness and snappiness, right? And in some games you can get away with it, some games you don't. But in my case, I wanted to get into my walk animation as soon as I start moving. So one way to do that is select the transition and go to the inspector of that transition, and we want to change a few parameters. Let's get out of exit time because that's sort of an easing between both animations. We want to eliminate that, and then we want to change fixed duration and transition duration to 0. We want to eliminate all those, turn it to 0. You'll see that there's some crossfading between these animations if we had some value there, and we don't want to do that because we want to go immediately from one animation clip to the other. And we're going to do that for both animation clips. Uncheck the has exit time, uncheck the fixed duration, uncheck or set this transition duration to 0. And that's going to allow us to see a lot more response, a quicker response between these two animations. As soon as I hit the button, I'm going to hit it now, let up, now, let up. We should be able to see that our character immediately goes between those things really quickly. Cool. I hope this video helps. Again, I'm going to link all this code and these sprites, sprite sheet in the description below. If you have any questions, please contact me. Hit subscribe if you like these videos. I'll see you later.